Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. And I get to chat to my friend, the amazing Professor Calvin Moorley. Calvin is a professor of diversity and social justice in the adult nursing department at London's South Bank University, where I used to work, and I had the pleasure and privilege of working alongside Calvin. So Calvin is an ex-colleague, but very, very much a friend, and I am such a champion of his work. We worked on some fantastic events together during my time at LSBU, and Calvin continues to completely smash it out of the park when it comes to supporting colleagues and students in the nursing and midwifery professions. I've spent a lot of time with Calvin over the years, but it was really great to have him on here and hear more about his origin story. So please enjoy. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and let me know what you think. Cheers. Hey Calvin, it is so good to see you. Welcome to Pause and Rewind.
Hi, Neil. Thank you so much for having me. It's a
Thanks.
pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. I miss working with you.
Yeah, I do as well, but it was nice to have you yesterday in a room delivering a session for me. But yes, it was great when we worked together. And well, we still do, but it's not on that everyday basis that we used to.
I know, but I'm still a massive, massive fan of your work, and you know that I love you to bits. I want to start by asking, what does the world look like for Professor Calvin Moorley right now?
The world, okay, I'm gonna be honest. The world sometimes look great. Sometimes the worlds look a little bit gray and hazy. But right now, I'm enjoying everything that I do. And the reason why I say this is where most universities, there are 61 universities in the UK at the moment going through restructuring and financial difficulties. And my university is one of those. And I was speaking to someone recently and I said, I don't know if my head is in a bubble, but because I am doing everything that I enjoy doing, this restructure thing doesn't seem to affect me yet. Probably it would, but right now, because I'm so into what I'm doing, I'm kind of like having blinkers on, so I don't see what's going on, although I do know what's going on. So, what's the world look like for me? It looks great. I'm doing a lot of work which I believe in around equality and nursing and healthcare, and that's keeping me and my passion going, really.
I love how passionate you are about your profession, and the way that you are constantly championing, celebrating, and showing up for nurses and midwives everywhere, particularly Black nurses and midwives.
Yeah, thank you for that. We know currently, I'm running a program at LSB called Elevate, which is enhancing the voice of ethnic minority leaders and transforming them. And Elevate came out of the need that 5 times more women die in childbirth, Black women, compared and Asian women compared to their white counterparts. And Elevate is that if we promote and we get women from Black and Asian backgrounds into senior position, then they are more in a place to advocate for women and hope of their same backgrounds, and hopefully that will lead to some sort of reduction in the health inequalities we see. So that's great.
Just to give those listening a bit of a feel for you and your story, how did you find yourself in nursing?
Oh gosh. Okay, so I should go right back to say I'm from the Caribbean originally. People could hear from the accent. Probably those listening to the podcast could try and guess the accent, and at the end we can tell them if they got it right or not. So I'm from this little island, and I grew up there, and I came to England. And I'll be honest with you, I have a migrant story, as most people do. I came and I traveled around for a little bit, and then I my visa was expiring and I didn't know what to do because I enjoyed England so much I wanted to stay. And one of my friends said, why don't you do nursing? They'll get you a visa. So that was tick for the immigration status. And B, they pay you some money while you're training. And that was another tick. And so I applied to do nursing, but I fell into the job and I fell in love with the job. So it's probably like some relationships. You hear people say, I met him or her and I didn't really fall in love with them, but I grew to love them. So it's the same thing for me in nursing. I met nursing and my first interview as a nurse, they told me, go away and think of what you want to do. You don't know what you want to do. And then I went and I found a job for 3 months in a nursing care residential home and
Okay.
really realized what I could do. So when I went back to another university, which was the University of Essex, and I had an interview. I knew exactly what it was going to be like, and that's where my passion started.
And the rest is history. And now you are Professor of Diversity and Social Justice at London Southend University. I can't wait to dive into your origin story and find out more about little Calvin. So for now, are you ready to press pause and rewind?
Yeah, I am. Let's go for it.
Well, hey, here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about little Calvin.
Um, so little Calvin grew up in a family from slave ancestry. So my parents and grandparents, as far as I can remember, and great grandparents, had a cocoa and coffee estate. So we grew up and we had a cocoa and coffee estate because when slavery was abolished, we were given a bit of land, my foreparents, that they can go and, cultivate. And all they knew was cocoa and coffee estates. So that's what we did. And I grew up in this really little tiny village. And the really nice thing about my childhood, one of the really fun memories, is I remember going with my parents to the cocoa and coffee estate and just running around as a child, not in shoes, bare feet, running around the estate, tripping over tree roots, climbing up trees. And that sounds idyllic and it was really nice. But saying that, the cocoa and coffee estate was like about 25 kilometers into the forest because you were black and you didn't get the best piece of land. You had to go somewhere really deep to, but that was good. And so that's part of the idyllic childhood. But I still grew up in a poor family and went to school, primary school, bare feet. Then grew up, went to secondary school, and it was great childhood, fond memories. And I'm the last child of eight. So one of the
Wow,
things
eight.
is, yes, I'm the last of eight. So one of the things is I have always learned to have to fight for everything I want. Because when you're the last of eight, you have to fight for it. You even have to shout over their voices. I think that's little Calvin stood me in good stead to do the job that I do now and the passion that I have because I've always had to fight for things that I wanted.
Oh, I mean, I've known you for a long time, and I definitely see that fight. What's some of your favorite anecdotes that you've been told about yourself?
Um, I have been told that I'm moody, and that is true. Don't talk to me first thing in the morning.
As a kid as well?
Um, no, just as an adult. So you mean as a
Oh,
child, were you
yeah,
asking?
yeah.
Okay. Um, Loud, mischievous, and spoiled. That's three words. But we know why I had to be loud. Spoiled is because people thought because I was the last child, I got everything. I didn't. My brothers and sisters lie about that, and my family. But
Oh, shots fired.
and mischievous because I was always getting into trouble. I did get into trouble a lot as a child.
Did you? What for doing what?
So in secondary school, for a whole year, I didn't go to one of my classes because I used to go outside the school grounds, put it that way.
You're gonna just leave it there.
And but in primary school also, I was also I was mischievous in that we were always doing little pranks on people and causing trouble. And I was always answering people back. I had a thing of where I felt I always need to say what I thought and I think. And my mother had a say, she used to say, Calvin, your mouth will get you into trouble one day. So And that's something I think we talk about later in one of the questions you're going to ask me. But that was one of the things that's has been said about your little Calvin. His mouth will get him into trouble.
Oh, I mean, I'm living for how much of little Calvin I see coming through in you. The mischievous, the definitely kind of like, maybe asking for forgiveness rather than permission, and doing your own thing. And again, that fight and passion coming through. What was the first moment that you kind of like took a look at the world and had thoughts about it, maybe your sense of your own sense of self and place in the world?
So, okay, I identify as a gay man growing up in a really tiny little village in the Caribbean as a child. I knew I was different.
Yeah.
I knew I was different. I, the typical scenarios, because I had five sisters and two brothers, and my brothers were the top of the family, my five sisters and then me. I played with my two younger sisters and their dolls. I enjoyed doing I enjoyed cooking with my mother. And I don't say these are feminine things, but I was never the child who would go out and play with, not football, but cricket in the road. I was never the child that would go out and do all those aggressive, masculine things that you were taught in that culture to do. I always enjoyed different things. Um, so I knew I was different. And then I kind of realized I liked people of my own gender, which is men as such. And it was difficult because you can't tell people about that.
Hmm.
You grew up in a very small village. I came from a very strong Christian family background, and that in itself really stifles you and your identity. And
Yeah.
I think most people who are listening to this and who identify as, LGBTQIA, we know what it's like to mask ourselves. And I had to do it for a number of reasons. And even while I was a teenager, I used to read in the newspapers of, people who were found, like two men were found together and then one committed suicide.
Mm.
Because that's the culture. We're taught about the shame we bring upon our families, the evilness. So as a young, growing up Calvin, then forming my own identity, it was really difficult to come to a place where you're brought up in this very religious family and you're told God loves you, but you're also told you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
You're going to die. You are evil. And, when I had my first sexual experience, I felt guilty. And,
Right.
the whole shame and the religious stuff that emerged. But then, you know, occurrences happen again. And then I came to this reality and this realization, well, it makes me happy. I feel good when I share moments and I fall in love with someone who is another man. So therefore, this is what happiness is. And I reconciled my own spirituality, and I wouldn't say religiosity, but spirituality and the church. And I'm just happy. And I wish most men would be able to find that who come from a faith background, because it's really difficult when you grow up in different societies or or communities where religion plays a huge part on your upbringing. So I would say, coming back to your question, that identity formation for me. So if we talk about the whole intersectionality thing, a word I didn't know about, but I was, from a Caribbean society, religious family background, male, I had all these intersectionalities and they were crashing. Intersectionality is about, we say we intersect, but my intersectionalities were crashing when I was at that age because
Yeah.
they were warring with each other. Like, no, you can't be gay, you can't be religious. No, you can't be this person. No, you can't live like that. What would your family think if you came out as gay? And I was just like, I was literally, my intersectionalities were colliding head on. And but what I learned is how to, I guess in my own way, how those intersectionalities actually interlock to form who Calvin is.
Yeah.
I got them to interlock rather than collide and say, actually, your spirituality brings you happiness and joy. You being a gay person brings you happiness and joy. So let's interlock them.
I love that.
Let's
That's such
weave
a
them together. So that's
going,
what I started doing. But I didn't know I was doing it at the time, right? Now I
yeah.
can reflect and say that. But
Yeah.
that's what was happening.
That's one of the beauties about taking a moment to reflect. And I love that journey from Crash and Clyde.
Mm.
through to interlocking. That's really important. I imagine that's the same for many people. I've got two things that I'd love to delve into. So what did that reconciliation look like when it come to coming out? Um, and then I'd love to dive a bit more into the religious side of things.
Okay. So it's not to trigger anyone, but just to say we all have our families, and I love my family, and we went through that stage when that reconciliation. First, I had my own reconciliation myself. So I found my community, and I really learned what that word, that phrase we say, we are born in a family, then we have our own family as
Amazing.
LGBTQIA people. I really found what that meant. Because I had my LGBTQIA family, and that was so important. So that helped me to reconcile. When I came to England, uh, one of the things I did was I trained as a nurse at Essex University in the 1990s, 1992 to 95. And while I was there, one of my ways of finding my communities, I started volunteering to work for the Colchester Gay Switchboard.
Yeah.
And that taught me a lot about community and family. So it's finding the people who share your own ideas and thoughts and how we move things forward. So that was part of it, the reconciliation. But then, so I reconciled it myself, and I think I know who I am, and I was proud of myself, and I was no longer in the stigma section of beating myself up. There was none of that anymore. And then I moved into, well, living outwardly here in the UK as gay, but going back home to Trinidad on holidays and being the straight Christian man. And it's difficult, and you come to the point when you have to unmask, as I say. And I told my mother one day, and she went, "Oh, I always knew." So sometimes we think that, family's gonna be, and my mother died, but the rest of my family had a really huge problem. And when you have eight siblings, they're always talking to each other, okay, or seven siblings. The WhatsApp group is constantly going, or the whatever, you're using in social media to communicate. And then I realized they were all talking about me. And so it caused a rift. There's a rift where I don't know if it'll ever be healed, but we are close. We do talk.
Hmm.
I do love them. I know they love me. But the mere fact of how long it took for them to accept me, it
Yeah,
created a rift. And that's why I say we have two families. And I know my family in the LGBTQIA community who really loves me for who I am and what I do. And then I know I have a biological family who has come to the point of accepting me and love me. But I don't know if that love I've had for them will ever be as strong as. And that's probably a journey I am on, and I'll get there. But that's where we are at the moment. And I think, talking to you in this podcast is to say to people, it's not all rosy.
no,
I have a huge public profile as leadership in nursing and midwifery, but also we all battle with our own issues. So it's not always rosy when you see us out in public doing great stuff. We still have those same problems like everyone else. And I think it's important that those are shared so that people see the humanity and the reality of our lives and what it's like.
that's it. I mean, you can be successful, you can have that big profile, but we
Mm.
all share a lot of commonalities. And as
Yeah,
queer people, um, sometimes it takes family members a bit longer to
yeah,
get on the journey. And sometimes they never get there. So I think it's beautiful that you have reached an acceptance level with your family where there is a relationship.
yeah.
It might not be what everyone has around you or that you necessarily deserve, but you've got to an acceptance point and there's love there, and that that I can imagine that that's sometimes hard
Mm.
to reconcile. Are you okay to dive into the religious side of things? Because it's come up a lot on this podcast,
Oh,
uh,
really?
the battle between I say battle, it's sometimes an internal battle, but it's also a societal conversation around religion and sexuality. You have your churches that are staunchly against
Mm-hmm.
same-sex relationship, LGBTQ, IA individuals, but then you have your churches and your religious leaders that are really open and they're very, very, very welcoming. So how have you moved forward with your religious and I know you said spirituality?
So, as I said, I came to the realization that, um, I have both. And as I say, rather than they crash and they collide, they need to interlock.
Yeah.
Because both gives me that mindful peacefulness that makes me whole, both sides of A being a gay man, A being a gay man with a spiritual identity, if that's the right term. Um, I have gone through many churches, as you said. Um, I have sat in churches for months, and then people say to me, I've never seen your wife with you, and you're like, okay, at least you're trying to talk to me, I'll tell you. And then when you say it, you kind of realize, like, okay, that didn't go down well.
Bun.
Yeah. I mean, I have been to churches where the vicars have emailed me and says, I hope we can continue to be friends, but I just want you to know that I don't share your values.
Okay.
And I like, okay, as you said, so those are heartbreaking things when you feel you're part of a community. But also, I have found that I have found the places that I really like as places of worship that are welcoming. And I have just learned, and it's really hard. We hear it being branded around a lot. Being your authentic self is really hard to be.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, so there are churches who welcome me. I say me welcome our communities. And there are churches who don't wish to acknowledge our communities exist, but if we show up, they're all right with it. So I have found a church that I particularly like going to. I engage with them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're outwardly open to LGBTQIA people, but when asked the question, I am not ashamed. I'm authentically me to say, yeah, I am gay. Or when they say it's Pride Month, and someone in church, when you have that 5 minutes talk to someone next to you, and they say, what are you doing? And you say, well, it's Pride Month, and this is what I'm doing. And you kind of get that conversation going.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to really be authentically you in those situations, but I have learned how to be it by just conversations are natural things. And if people are uncomfortable, there's that saying, you have to then start to embrace that uncomfortableness and think, yeah, my church is diverse and let's work with that. So that's one of the things I've come to accept. I do go and visit other churches, and social media has been great. I mean, we know social media can be a pile-on at times, but I have found other people like myself, who, has a spiritual identity and their LGBTQIA identity, and it comes together. And so I found, vicars who I can talk to, other members who I can speak to, and it's great. But I should say I was kicked out of the church choir once, okay?
Right.
And that's not for being LGBTQIA. Apparently, I can't sing, but I love going to the choir and singing. And I had only missed one rehearsal, and I got dumped by text. I was told, sorry, you've missed a key rehearsal. You cannot come back to the choir. And that was the only way they could get rid of me. But, I still show up in church.
Damn right. Well, that's beautiful to hear. Thank you for sharing. I want to take it back a little bit to your teenage years. For
Yeah.
many of us, this is quite formative. We've got changes in our bodies. As you've said, you had your first experiences, kind of like with men.
Mm.
Um, we go through many different realizations. What else stands out to you about that time? What did you think that you wanted to do? Was nursing always on the cards? What was the world looking like?
So the world for me was looking like, so the equivalent of GSEs, we call them CXCs, Caribbean examinations in the Caribbean. So we're just doing GCSEs, and that's when you think you're gonna have your friends for life, right? You say you hug each other, you say we're never gonna let go, we'll always keep in contact, and you realize 6 months later nobody keeps in contact. But so I was at that formative stage where um I didn't know I wanted to be a nurse. I knew I loved teaching. I wanted to work in education. I really wanted to work in education. So I started off after I left school, because remember I used to miss half a day every week because I was just being truant. Um, so I left school without much GCSEs. Okay, and this is again something people think you're a professor and you're really successful. When I left school, I had less than five GCSEs equivalent.
Okay.
I have never done A levels or sixth form college. Because my parents, A, couldn't afford to send me, and B, I messed up basically. Yeah. Um, so what I did was I started helping out as an assistant in a what would you call them? A Montessori school, a nursery school. So it was for children between age 3 to 5. And I was working with them and teaching and working and playing. And it was quite, I don't know if it was innovative or pushing the boundaries in Trinidad then, because when they had the National like Teachers Association meetings, I was the only man in the room because working in that age group was predominantly, again, because of the society and culture, was predominantly a women's space.
Hmm.
So you'd mostly find females doing that job. But and I was the only man at one point. But it was great to do that. And then, fast forward, I came to England and then I became a nurse and then got into education. So I'm kind of like went full circle. Now it's adults rather than children. But so I left school out at 16, and by age 16 and a half, 17, I started working as a teaching assistant. So
Can
and I
we
did that for about 3 years.
can we just talk about the move to England? What prompted the move? What was going on around you that you thought actually I'm gonna take a chance?
So I had a lot of friends who were leaving Trinidad and coming to England to study nursing. And I didn't really think I wanted to do that. But, back in the day of handwritten letter correspondences, which is what we did, 1990, 92, that sort of era, I I was hearing the stories of my friends, of how they were doing nursing and what living in England was like. But at the same time, there was a scheme introduced by the government for the working holiday visas.
Okay.
So I came and I did that little bit of travel on that. And that's how I stayed. So that was, I mean, I left Trinidad with literally one suitcase. I didn't have anything much, and that was it. That was going to be life. I came and I stayed with a friend who was actually studying nursing and shared a little one room, student digs for a while. And then, but just moving around was because I was able to work. And and that was the move really. I was just like, but also to be honest with you, I also knew because I was still in my teenage years then, right? 19, 20 years old. So I knew I was gay. I accepted that. But also coming to a larger nation was my way out.
Yeah.
For me, it was a way out. And I almost, again, because of social media, I connect with a lot of young gay men in Trinidad and look at the activism they're doing. And I almost feel, I don't want to say sad, but I almost think like, that would have been me if I stayed in Trinidad. But at that time, I wouldn't have had the support probably they have now of
Hmm.
people like me supporting them from abroad through, again, active work through social media and connecting on, online communities, which didn't really exist back then. So I am glad I'm still able to support people with LGBTQI activism in Trinidad, but it also was my ticket out
Yeah.
and out in big words.
There, out.
Yeah.
What did you make of, where did you first live in London? What did you make of it? Like, how did you feel about making that jump?
So when I first came to England and London, I lived in Ashford, Middlesex.
Okay.
Not Ashford, Kent, Ashford, Middlesex. And I had to get that right. Whenever people said, "Where do you live?" I said Ashford. And I was told, no, no, people think you're in Kent. You have to say Ashford, Middlesex.
Okay.
So Ashford, Middlesex is near Staines. One of my friends was a nurse, student nurse, and that's where I was sharing the accommodation. I was really kind of like smuggled in a way, 'Cause I don't think you were allowed to have someone living with you for 3 months, probably stay for a week, but not 3 months. But it was really nice. So it wasn't the bright city lights of London.
Mhm.
Now I live in Shoreditch and it's everything
I
happens.
mean, you're a Londoner now, right?
Exactly. But so when I first came for that first year, um yeah, 12, 14 months, I lived in Middlesex, Ashford. And so it was never really central London. So everything I did was kind of outside, Staines, Hounslow, that side of West London, Ealing. And then I left there and I went to train in Essex, which was even more countryside. I was in Colchester.
Yeah, of course.
And everybody used to say the thing constable country, and I didn't understand what that meant, you know. So I kind of learned afterwards. So there is that. And it's only after I qualified as a nurse and I moved back to London to work at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital that I really feel I was in London
Yep.
because I was Ashford, Middlesex, and then I was Essex for 3 years. And then when I returned, for work purposes, then I felt I was in London because I was living quite centrally then.
I can imagine that was a really big culture shift, coming from Trinidad to West London to Essex and then coming to Central London. Like, Essex back in the 90s was, let's call it what it is, whiter than white.
Mhm.
That must have been quite a culture shock.
So it was. And I had one other person from Trinidad who was training in my intake or sets as they were called at Essex. And if ever anybody was, read the first page of my PhD thesis, I talk about this, why I did my doctorate and what I did. She said we were in Colchester Town, North Hill, and she said to me, have Calvin, have a look around. What do you see? And I was like, oh, the Castle Park is down the road there, and this way is a train station. And she said, have a look again and tell me what you see. And I said, oh, I see an old man crossing the street, and I see that woman just picked up her children. And I was being quite literal. And she said, but can you not see you and I are the only two black people standing here
Mm,
on this high street? And she terminated her training and she came to London to complete it. Or she transferred her training actually, because she said she couldn't live in Essex.
yeah.
And because there wasn't a community, she didn't feel she belonged. She faced the racism and the discrimination as a woman, black woman. But that then inspired me when I went back into the hospitals, was like, back then you didn't want to use the word race too much. So a lot of us use the word culture instead. And I started thinking like, well, how do we offer culturally competent care to people at this hospital?
Mm.
Because there are people from different backgrounds who will come in at some point, and how do you offer that care? So that made me really begin to delve into, culture and differences. But that experience in Colchester, it took another person from my country to point out to me that we were the only two people standing on that street for almost an hour and the impact that had.
It's interesting that was just a moment in time, but it probably shaped so much about you moving forward from that moment in time.
Yeah, it certainly did. It certainly did because it just catapulted me to look at, okay, so how does this impact on care? If we're the only people here, when people like you and I come to a hospital, how do we offer that care? That culturally competent care. As I said, back then we didn't want to use the word race too much, so we'd have said culturally competent care.
All an amazing story so far. I just want to ask what happens next.
So I came to London. I started working at Guy's and St. Thomas's. I have a real migrant story. Okay, I'll tell you this now. And but I was still on my student visa, which was due to expire. And that the time in the 1990s when I qualified as a nurse, there was a glut. There was too many nurses in the market, so you weren't going to be successful to get a work permit to stay in the country. And so I was working through an agency, and there was this wonderful manager in the intensive care unit at Guy's and St. Thomas's. And she said to me one day, um, you're such a good nurse. Why don't you come and work for me? And then another week she said it again. This, thing of a good nurse we all have, whatever that means. And one day I just took the courage and I knocked on her door and I said, Sue, you keep asking me to come and work for you. The reason why is because, and I explained my whole visa immigration situation to her. She said, is that what's stopping you from applying? And she was like, I will go down to Petty France myself and get your visa for you. And you know what she did?
She
I got a
did.
4-year work permit to work for Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital. And that's why I'm always indebted to them. You'll always see me doing things for Guy's and St. Thomas's because it's because of them I got my post-registration experience. I got my sort of legal immigration status in the country. And then from there, my career just took off as an intensive care trained nurse in working with people in cardiac. My background was cardiothoracic ICU. So people with heart transplant, heart bypass operations, lung transplants, removal of lungs. those sort of things that I look after. And I she was just wonderful. So when we talk about white people and allies, she was just that ally, and she didn't just get me a work permit. She made sure everything was sorted, and I knew what was going on, and then I got disillusioned with nursing, and I went on to do a degree in politics at Goldsmiths
I
College.
was about to say, I kind of I remember the next step was Goldsmiths.
Yeah. So I went to Goldsmiths College and I did a degree in politics. And when I completed it, so in the year that I did politics, there were a lot of international changes. The Berlin Wall came down, Clinton became president, Tony Blair won here in England. So there are lots of political changes I remember in my time at Goldsmiths that but after my degree in politics, I did that. I continued working in the nighttime, night duty, and went off to study in the day. Okay, so I still remain full-time working as a nurse. Um, and when I completed my degree, I, I say I was back on the unit as such. One day, Sue said to me, "Wow, you have a degree. Most nurses don't have a degree, you know. What are we gonna do with you?" And I just
Okay.
smiled. I thought she was just being, playful. And at that point, Guys and St. Thomas's was recruiting their first set of international nurses, Filipino and Indian nurses to England. And she said, now that you have a degree, I want you to take on this group of nurses and get them to be recognized as nurses in this country because their qualifications didn't translate. So they had to do an adaptation course to
Hmm.
become recognized by our register. And I did that first ever intake at Guys and St. Thomas's. That's how I got into education from there. I started teaching.
Amazing. And full circle from going from
Yeah.
teaching the Litlands back in
Yeah.
Trinidad through to that moment. I really want to ask, what was the moment, you've gone through nursing and you've got politics. So I imagine that was quite eye-opening in terms of your lived experience and then having that education
Yeah.
behind you. What was the moment where you decided that a path of social justice was on the cards?
So if you think of it from the moment I did this degree in politics because I'll be honest, I was disillusioned with nursing. I thought I don't ever want to be a nurse anymore. There's
Right.
too much, you know, stuff was going on, restructuring and all of that. And I said, I'm going to do something far removed as possible. I'm going to go and do this degree in politics. And then I realized how political healthcare is. So it really
Yeah.
anchored me, and I use the word anchor that I'll stay in nursing and healthcare. But so what was the for me, the move for it was for social towards social justice was I was open to the experiences of those international nurses and what they experienced. And now we talk about it a lot more, but people were qualified nurses with years of experience in their own country. They were probably even more qualified than me. But we set this a bar to say that because their education didn't meet our standards, we started paying them a lower grade and they stayed there for a year. And that in itself is a social injustice. So, my social justice started from there. But it also started way back when, if I track it, to when I worked on the for the Colchester Gay Switchboard, because it was about social justice. Because I came from a position where, as a young teenage person from a different background, I wanted to talk to other people who might have experienced the same thing as me and how I can support them through the switchboard. Um, and it was also the 1990s, the time of HIV and AIDS, right? And there were those huge campaigns. So I had to quickly get to grips with understanding those issues as well. And again, the social injustices around what our communities faced during HIV and that HIV and AIDS, epidemic era, pandemic era. So my social justice started from then. But then also when so if I plotted, then I did a Mary Seacole Award. I did my doctorate looking at African Caribbean women. So I had a scholarship at the University of East London to do my doctorate. And I looked at life after stroke among African Caribbean women in East London. But what I was really interested in was the interplay between gender, culture, and society on people's health. So I always had a feminist approach because I had, grew up with five sisters and my mother. So I wanted to look at um how does society, our culture, and politics influence the health of particular groups of women. I was looking at that whole interplay and intersectionality. So that really and truly then pushed me into all the social justice work that I do.
And the amazing people that you work with as well, from like, Dame Elizabeth, Annie Onwu, through to so many other inspirational nurses and midwives. And I know how important LGBTQ issues are to you, but equally, I know that you're a massive advocate for gender equality. So it's good to know that five sisters, your mom, all kind of spurred that.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. And as you know, as you say, I set up I'm the founder for the Dame Elizabeth Anyone Fellowship for inclusivity in nursing and midwifery, and we really look at inclusivity. We also we do the annual lecture every year in Dame Elizabeth's name. But then I also work, as you say, with people like Professor Laura Sarrant,
Yes, we love
who's
Laura.
Laura talks about the silences framework, and she says, there are silences we need to learn to listen to and uncover. And again, you know, uh, most marginalized groups have their silences, and we have to really listen. When we think they're not speaking, there's a reason for that silence. So we really need to listen to those silences. So, again, people like Laura, Janet File, who was given an honorary doctorate last year at LSBU for her work around gender violence and particularly female genital mutilation against young girls and women. Ruto Shikanlu, who you also probably know,
Yes.
their work around nursing entrepreneurship and supporting people. So I've been really privileged to work with a group, but again, it has always been this group of women that has taken me and supported me.
And you're doing that right back.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
Doing it
reversing
back.
as well. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
giving.
no, I often talk about it's often the women in my life who have been my biggest supporters and cheerleaders. And so the way I show up in the world is to understand gender equality
Yeah.
and inequality and to talk about menopause and stuff. But I have to say, Calvin, like I'm gonna give you your flowers here. You have been a massive, massive role model and inspiration and guide for me in terms of my understanding, particularly around white allyship and just, working alongside you. I learned so much and also had the pleasure of working with many of the women that you have just listed there. So I'd like to ask you, who's perhaps someone who has shaped you most along the way?
Um. So if I speak as a person, I mean just a general person, it will always go back to probably being my mother. 'Cause my mother was a very strong woman. Um, and she told me a lot of home truths. Um, but in the terms of the professional career, I don't think there's just any one person. There is that group of women that I've called their names, and they have really pushed and molded, and they still do. That's the wonderful thing. They'll still call me up and say, Calvin, you know what? I don't like what you said, and this is why I think what you said will offend people or cause, and that's why I like them. They we call each other out when things happen, and within that group, that they're really really great. But there's also Dr. Rosita West, who most people wouldn't.
Oh, she's
I speak to
gorgeous.
Rosita and I share a phone call every day. We do a walk and talk session, and I just learn so much from her. So sometimes it's not all the big names, it's those people who you have those everyday
Yeah.
conversations with. She really helps shapes my thinking and how I do things.
Having been in those circles with you on a professional and social level, every moment is joy. Like, it's beautiful. Does happiness and success look and feel how you thought it might?
Yes and no. I don't know if that's the answer you want.
Don't want any
Happiness,
answer.
um, it's for me, it's contentment it brings. And I just love the fact that the type of work I do. So recently, for example, I ran a developmental program for Nigerian nurses in the UK, who came over as migrant nurses. And just after the end of the program, to hear how much they had learned, and some of them had gotten promotions during the program, because I was giving them these tips of what they need to do. And it's a development program. So to see that fruit of that labor was just really wonderful. The NIHR has funded us to do a program on developing Black and Brown nurses and midwives as researchers. And we're doing that at the moment. And so those things make me really happy. So when I see that people are elevated through it, through the programs. That's what true happiness looks like. But also on the very personal level, um, my husband, family, friends, they also make you happy. Work doesn't always make me happy because there are bits of work that we love, and there's parts of the job we have to do that we don't like, but we have to do
Hmm.
it. Yeah, we know those. So, but overall, that's it looks good at the moment. This is what it looks like for me, seeing other people become successful through what we do to empower them.
Yep, you're such a champion of other people. You really are. Final question for this segment. What are
Uh,
you most proud of to date?
I'm proud of my achievement because I had never realized how much I achieved. And I'm one of those people I keep doing. And when I gave my inaugural lecture, when Professor Tara Dean read my citation, I almost felt embarrassed. I was sitting with my head down like that because, like, oh my God, it sounds so boastful that I've done all these things. So when I look at everything, I am just proud that I have been able to make an impact on people's lives. And in my whole career, I've qualified about 20,000 nurses.
That's
So for me,
incredible.
20,000 nurses as part of the workforce. I'm really privileged for that. I'm really, really privileged to have done that for this country.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
I'll try. Let's go.
Here we go. What album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
So the book will be A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Okay.
A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by, and her name has slipped me, it will come back to me. Um, and it's about it's about an Irish family transplanted into New York. And Frances never wanted to become like her mother, but everything she did was becoming her mother. But A Tree Grows in Brooklyn had a profound effect on me because sometimes I always thought I never wanted to be like my father, and I had some things that were of him. But there you go. So A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. The film The Shawshank Redemption,
Amazing
and
film.
I'll tell you really briefly why. If you all remember this scene, he goes for parole 3 times. The first time he went for parole because he thought he should have gone for it and he didn't get it. The second time he deliberately does something so he doesn't get parole. And the third time he created a network because Dupre had escaped and he had a network on the outside. And he knew he was ready to be supported because what he didn't have was the network to support him. And
Hey,
this is how I interpret the Shawshank Redemption. So, and when he went for parole the third time, he was ready because he knew
okay.
he had his network outside. And that's why I like it. That's my take
Oh,
on it.
there's some hard life lessons there, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I love that takeaway. What's a saying that you live by, and one that you would put in the bin?
So a saying that I would live by, he who feels it knows it, or they who feels it knows it.
Okay,
And one that I would put in the bin, and it's probably because of my trauma, is but we've learned as queer people to reclaim words, okay? But you're so gay.
okay,
Because it's just because of the trauma that has had on me. But now I can see my friends and we can say it. But I think it's that thing of what we tell people, we need to realize how it lands. So that was just really personal to me in that sense.
so, yeah, I hear that. You know, what's been the best adventure of your life so far?
So my best adventure is still continuing. My best adventure is my husband Nick, and he will tell you, yes, I am moody. He will tell you, Calvin, his latest phrase is, what goes on in Calvin's world, what's because he knows when I'm thinking and what my world is like. And he goes, what's it like in Calvin's world sometime? That's because he thinks I live in this really nice airy fairy world because that's how I want to make the world better. But my adventures with Nick every day, it may be the mundane days of the relationship, it may be the days when I'm angry and upset with him. He has never ever raised his voice at me, never ever once has I may shout, but he will never shout. He's just so calm, and he just really anchors me. And this adventure with him has been going on for 25 years now, and I just hope it continues.
Oh, I mean, I love your relationship. I love your wardrobes. You're both so stylish, and it's always gorgeous seeing you together. What three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
So three words I would say is fighter, because I do fight. I would say always caring. And believe it or not, Smiley, because people say I smile a lot. I don't realize I smile a lot, but I do. So I think with initially people see me and they say, oh yeah, he's really smiley. I would say I'm a fighter because I do take things on board and I fight for them. And so those are my things. And most importantly, I'll always say to people, I'm a nurse. That's one thing. That's how I always describe myself first and foremost. When I went for my doctoral viva, I was asked tell me something about you. And they just wanted to make me relax because they were so nervous having, when you do this PhD Viva. And I said, my name is Calvin and I'm a nurse. And then that's always stuck with me. So, and it made me realize, that I am a nurse and I'm true and true. And I love that.
I'm just jotting that down because I love it. It's so you. I love how those three words, fighter, caring, and smiley, are everything that you bring to your profession and the way you show up for your students, the way you show up for colleagues. Yeah, thank you. Those are amazing. Are you good to fast forward a little bit?
Yeah, let's go for it. We're on a roll.
What exciting things do you have coming up?
Exciting things. On personal level, um, holidays.
I know
Uh,
you love your
Yeah,
holidays.
we're gonna go to Greece. We're gonna go to Greece this year, and I love Greece. I'm not sure which island or what we're gonna do, but we're gonna go to Greece. Um, and then, um, I have to ask, so when does this podcast go out?
July.
Okay, great. So I can say, because it's embargoed until the 6th of July. I I have just been awarded a Churchill Travel Fellowship. So I'm going to travel to America for 4 weeks and Australia for 4 weeks. Looking at how models they have used to support Black people in education, looking at setting up a center specifically for Black and Brown nurses to develop them. So I've been awarded that. So that's part of what the future looks like. Very exciting.
That's huge news. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
As always, so proud of you and everything you do. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? The fact that Nick still looks after me every day.
That is
So that
joyful.
that 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 brings me joy. That also but the joy also comes, as I said to you, from seeing people benefit from the work I do. So the work I do, it's not about centering Calvin and Calvin is doing this and Calvin is leading that. The work that I do is about, benefiting others. And that in itself is a true joy to see those benefits.
What takeaways do you have for anyone listening wanting to do something that enforces inclusion and empowers inclusion?
I think you got to show up. You got to make yourself visible and show up at these meetings, places, organizations, whatever is going on. If we are not visible, as an LGBTQIA community, if we're not visible as Black people, if we're not visible as men, as women, as genderqueer people, we're not going to have our space in the market. We're not. So we need to, my thing is, you need to show up and you need to be visible. And when you're there, you'll then have your voice because sometimes I get invited to a lot of stuff at the university and I think, oh my God, why do they want me to do this? Or an external organization asks me to sit on a committee or a board and then I think, oh, I can't do this, it's too much. And then I stop and I think my visibility counts because when I'm there, I also have a voice. and that means I can change things or people can listen. So I think it's really important that we show up.
Thank you. And then my
Even when
final
we're not
question.
invited, even when we're not invited,
Oh,
just
I
show up.
love that. I love that. We're getting that mischievous Calvin again.
Yeah.
My final question for you, Calvin, is this. Do you have any words of wisdom or encouragement for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
Um, Sometimes you have to give up, and that's not a bad thing. Acknowledge that, but I don't say give up. Sometimes you need to hibernate. So I say, my idea for blah 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 is hibernating for 6 months while I repackage it. So don't ever give up as such. Hibernate your ideas if you need to and restructure them and go forward again. Um, and I would just say, do what you do with a passion, but remember it's not always about centering you. It's about the wider community who you're going to support from what you do. So it's decenter and do it with your passion.
Calvin, I am so grateful that we took this time to dive into your story. I'm always grateful for the time spent with you. And thanks so much for appearing on Pause and Rewind.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I loved it. See you soon.
See you soon. Take care.
I mean, as if I couldn't love Calvin any more than that. Professor Morley, you are fantastic, honestly. I love the way that Calvin proudly says you need to show up to be visible. And that really, really sits with us, particularly off the back of Pride season, and just showing up in the world when it comes to supporting minorities and really, really championing those around us. Um, Calvin's tagline, my name is Calvin and I'm a nurse, and how that says so much about him. And he's the three words that he uses to describe his origin story: fighter, caring, and smiley. And he really is all of those things. Calvin has such a vision for how to, kind of uplift people and bring them along on the journey. But it was amazing to hear how, from growing up as a young gay kid in Trinidad, and how he has learned to reconcile who he is with his upbringing, culture, and religion, and to, yeah, just find that peace and the beautiful life that he lives with his amazing partner, Nick. So, Calvin, I am so grateful for you for taking time out to talk to me. I love that we continue to support and work together on things as well. And yeah, do give Calvin a lot of love. Please like, share with anyone you feel might benefit from listening from this conversation, and stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. Thank you so much.